My name is Deborah Howard, and if you had asked me even a week ago what my life looked like, I would have told you it was stable, predictable. Not perfect, but familiar in all the ways that make you believe the ground beneath your feet won't suddenly split open. I lived with my boyfriend, John Henderson, for 6 years, 9 years together total. No engagement, not yet, because John always said he wasn't ready, and I convinced myself that patience was the same thing as love. I thought we were building something slow and steady, something lasting. Looking back, maybe I was just building alone. Last Thursday started like any other ordinary day that disguises a disaster. I had landed a huge account at work, a medical software firm I'd been courting for months. To celebrate, one of my biggest clients insisted on taking me to dinner at an upscale Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant with soft lighting, heavy table linens, and a menu full of dishes you pretend to recognize. Around 4 p.m. I sent John a text, going to be late tonight. Client dinner. His reply came quickly. Perfect timing. My mom wants me to come over for dinner. She's been lonely lately. Don't wait up. Love you. It felt ordinary. His mother lived 40 minutes away and he visited her a couple of times a month. There was nothing strange in that. Nothing suspicious. If anything, I was relieved he had plans. 2 guilt-free work dinners were rare. By 7:15, I arrived at the restaurant. My client was running late, so the hostess seated me at a small corner booth to wait. I tucked my phone beside my water glass and started organizing emails, mentally running through my talking points for later. Then I heard a laugh I didn't recognize at first but felt somehow. A woman's laugh, light high, then dipping into a husky snort at the end. It was oddly distinct, the sort of laugh you remember if you've seen enough old pictures of the person who makes it. Pictures John had shown me years ago when he talked about his past relationships in that casual, dismissive way people use when they promise they're over it. Her name was Marina Hale, John's ex-girlfriend. I glanced up only because the sound tugged at something, not because I expected anything, not because I was suspicious, not because I was looking for my boyfriend at a restaurant he shouldn't have been in. But I saw him anyway, 3 tables away. John sat across from a woman, Marina, her hand resting lightly on the stem of her wine glass, her body angled toward him in a way you don't angle toward someone's mother's kitchen table. They were sharing a bottle of red, deep and rich and intimate under the soft lighting. His eyes were fixed on her like she'd just said something clever. She was smiling like she knew exactly how to receive that gaze. And then she reached across the table and touched his face, a slow brush of fingers along his jaw. My stomach twisted, but my mind still refused to accept the obvious. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he ran into an old friend. Maybe. Then Marina leaned in and kissed him. Not a polite kiss, not an awkward surprise. A deep practice kiss. A kiss that felt like a continuation, not a beginning. For a moment, my whole body went silent. My heartbeat forgot what it was supposed to do. The room dimmed into a tunnel. Sounds warped, and I watched the man I loved kiss a woman he claimed was part of a past closed long ago. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't get up and sprint across the room in righteous fury. Shock is quiet, colder than you think. It settles in your bones and makes your movements deliberate and small. A waiter approached my table, asking something about sparkling or still. I must have nodded because he placed a glass of water in front of me, though I don't remember lifting my eyes to meet his. My hands trembled just enough that I had to steady them on the table. I don't know what instinct took over, survival, self-preservation, or something mechanical, but I reached for my phone. I angled it carefully, zooming just enough, capturing John and Marina mid-kiss, her hand on his cheek, his lips pressed to hers, timestamp included. Then I opened our message thread. I typed, "Enjoy dinner with your mom. Attach the photo," and hit send. I watched from across the restaurant the exact moment her phone buzzed in his pocket. John pulled away from Marina, smiling lazily at first, pulling out his phone, no doubt expecting a harmless check-in or a goodnight text. Then his face drained. He dropped his phone. It clattered against the table loud enough that Marina jerked backward in surprise. He looked up, eyes scanning the room with frantic, jerky movements, searching for me, searching for a way to undo something that had already been cemented in digital proof. Our eyes met across the room. It wasn't anger I saw in his expression. It wasn't guilt either. It was panic. The panic of someone who never expected accountability to arrive so cleanly, so suddenly, so undeniably. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I stood, slipped a 20 under the untouched water glass, and walked out. No scene, no dramatic confrontation, nothing he could twist later. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. But even then, my body felt disconnected, like I was watching myself from a distance. I walked to my car, sat inside, locked the doors. Then I drove. Not home, never home, not yet. I drove around the city for almost 2 hours, headlights slicing through the dark, my phone vibrating nonstop beside me, calls, texts, voicemails. All John. I didn't open any of them. Around 10 p.m., I pulled into a hotel parking lot and booked a room. The bed was stiff, the pillows flat, and I slept maybe 2 hours total, staring at the ceiling, waiting for reality to settle into something I could understand. It never did. The next morning, I powered my phone back on. 38 missed calls, nearly 50 messages. The highlights. It's not what it looks like. Deborah, please come home. We need to talk. You're overreacting. She's just a friend. I can explain everything. Where are you? I'm worried sick. This is happening because you're always working. We never spend time together. That last message cut through the fog in my mind like a blade. Less than 12 hours after being caught kissing another woman, John had already shifted from remorse to blame, rapid, practiced, familiar, in a way I suddenly realized I had ignored too many times. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I opened my contact list and called the one person who had always warned me to watch for red flags, my older sister Natalie. Her voice broke before I could finish explaining. Come home, she said. You're not staying alone tonight. I didn't realize until that moment that I'd been holding my breath for hours. I gathered my bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed directly to her house without once looking back toward the life I had begun leaving behind the night before. Natalie didn't ask a single question when she opened the door. She just pulled me into her arms and held me tightly in that fierce, grounding way only an older sister can. For the first time in hours, maybe days, I felt something settle inside me. When she released me, her eyes flicked over my face, taking in everything I was trying not to feel. You're staying here, she said simply. No arguments. Her house felt warm, steady, lived in. The kind of place you go when you need to borrow some stability because you've run out of your own. I put my bag in the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed again, John, but I turned it off and let the silence swallow his name. Natalie knocked and stepped in, holding a mug of tea. She placed it beside me and sat down. Tell me. So I did. Every detail. The restaurant, Marina, the kiss, the photo, the messages, the way John's face had fallen apart when he realized I'd seen everything. When I finished, she didn't gasp or dramatize. She just exhaled slowly, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. Deborah, that wasn't an accident. That wasn't a moment of weakness. That was deliberate. Her voice softened. And you didn't deserve any of it. I didn't trust myself to answer, so I just nodded. We stayed like that silent until the doorbell rang. The sound jolted me. Natalie stood. Stay here. I followed her into the hallway despite her telling me not to. She cracked the front door open. John stood outside, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight with panic he was trying to mask as righteous anger. Is Deborah here? He demanded. That depends, Natalie replied, her tone cool. Why? I need to talk to her, he said, trying to peer past her shoulder. She's blowing this way out of proportion. It was one dinner. Natalie didn't flinch. You kissed another woman. You lied about seeing your mother. You lied to her face. That's not one dinner. You're manipulating her, he snapped. You never liked me. Correct, Natalie said dryly. Now leave. He tried to push the door open. Natalie braced her arm against it unmoved. Deborah, he shouted over her shoulder. Please, just listen to me. I backed away instinctively. Natalie's voice rose firm but controlled. She does not want to see you. Leave before I call someone who will make you. John's eyes darted between us, desperation leaking through the cracks of his fading confidence. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, then turned sharply and stomped down the porch steps. Natalie shut the door and leaned against it for a moment. That's the beginning of it, she said quietly. He's going to try to rewrite the story. Don't let him. The next morning confirmed exactly that. John's mother left 6 voicemails before noon. I listened to the last one only because I wanted to understand exactly what narrative John had fed her. Deborah, this is childish. John told me everything. He made a mistake. A woman keeps her family together. She doesn't run away because her partner makes one emotional error. You need to grow up. Stop embarrassing yourself. I stared at the phone in disbelief. Something inside me clenched, then hardened. Natalie walked into the room just in time to hear the final line. Give me that, she said, grabbing the phone gently but firmly. She turned it off again. You don't need that poison right now. I didn't argue. By Monday morning, I felt like I was floating through a fog. The The world was moving, but I wasn't part of it. Still, I forced myself to take the next step. I walked into the office of a family law attorney, a woman named Amara Levin who radiated calm confidence in a way I desperately needed. I handed her everything, the photo, the texts, the timeline, and documents from my home office that I had quietly gathered when John wasn't home. Amara reviewed the evidence with a professional blankness that gave me strange comfort. "This is serious, Deborah," she finally said. "The photo gives you leverage, but the financial ties between you two complicate things." My stomach tightened as she explained. Even though the house was mine, purchased before John moved in. The kitchen renovation 2 years ago, funded from our joint account, gave him potential claim to the increased property value. And then there were the shared savings, the joint contributions, the credit cards, all threads that tied me financially to a man who had been preparing an escape route while pretending we were building a future. "We need to protect yourself immediately," Amara said. "People who cheat don't just lie romantically. They lie financially. They lie strategically." Her words hit something deep in my chest, a truth I didn't want to accept but couldn't deny. When I got back to Natalie's house, I opened my laptop and began trying to learn more about Marina, not out of jealousy, but out of necessity. Everything about her online presence looked polished. Group photos, corporate events, friends' birthdays. John appeared in the background of more of those photos than I was comfortable with. But the biggest blow came when I discovered her wedding photography album. Marina wasn't single. She wasn't newly divorced or unhappily married. She had a husband, 2 children, a smiling, unsuspecting family. I covered my mouth, realizing I wasn't the only one living in a collapsing universe. John hadn't just betrayed me. He had willingly become part of someone else's betrayal too. I sat with that for a long time before finally opening a new email account. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt inevitable. I attached the photo. No explanation, no story, no emotional plea. Just 4 words. "Check Thursday nights." I clicked send. I closed the laptop. Natalie didn't ask what I'd done, but she looked at me for a long moment, eyes soft, proud, and sad all at once. I wasn't proud of myself, but I wasn't ashamed either. That night, lying in her guest bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something quietly terrifying. This wasn't the end of anything. This was just the beginning. The fallout began faster than I expected. 2 days after I sent the anonymous email to Marina's husband, I woke up to Natalie standing over me, holding her phone like it was radioactive. "You need to see this," she said. I sat up slowly, bracing myself. She turned the screen toward me. A mutual acquaintance had posted something vague on social media. One of those dramatic paragraphs people write when they're trying not to spill gossip, but absolutely are. "Some men will destroy their whole families because they think no one is watching. Just remember, everything done in darkness comes to light." My heart thudded. Before I could ask more, Natalie's phone vibrated again. "Oh God," she whispered. "Deborah, this is about John." 15 minutes later, I had the full story. Marina's husband confronted her. She denied everything at first. Then he found more incriminating texts on her phone, screenshots included in a group chat I didn't have access to, thank God. Some messages were from John. Others were from Marina. They weren't just having an affair. They had been planning things. Real destructive things. She had told him, "John promised to leave me." John told her he was finally ready to build a life with her. And the more details I heard, the colder my hands felt. 8 months. 8 months of lies pressed into my daily life like invisible thumbprints. 8 months of Thursday nights, unexplained gym sessions, team dinners, and phone calls he stepped outside to take. Marina's husband filed for divorce within 48 hours. John, from what I heard next, was livid, furious not at himself, but at her for letting it all collapse, for not hiding things better, for not deleting things, for getting caught. I sat at Natalie's dining table, gripping a mug of tea I couldn't bring myself to drink, listening to this secondhand avalanche. Every new detail felt like a shove, but I didn't fall. Maybe because I'd already hit the ground days ago. Maybe because part of me always knew something wasn't right long before the restaurant. Natalie touched my hand gently. "You're doing better than anyone could expect," she said. I didn't feel like I was doing well. I felt like I was balancing on the edge of something sharp. Later that afternoon, I finally heard from my attorney. Amara spoke in that steady, practiced tone she used when something important was coming. "We subpoenaed John's phone records," she said. "There's a lot." I closed my eyes. "How bad?" "You deserve the truth." The messages between him and Marina aren't just romantic. They include discussions of finances, statements about intending to leave you once he positioned himself to claim certain assets. The room blurred for a moment. He planned for this, my voice cracked. Deborah Amara said softly, he didn't cheat impulsively. He cheated while building a strategy. I pressed a hand to my forehead. It felt like my brain was full of broken glass. Amara continued gently. There are texts where Marina encourages him to push harder, to convince you to contribute more to shared accounts. And one message where she says, and I'm reading this verbatim, once she moves her savings into the joint account, you'll be set. My breath caught. She said that, yes, more than once. And John replied with agreement. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt myself detach slightly the way you do when your body decides it's had enough and shifts into a quieter gear of survival. Amara paused. This will help your case significantly. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. It's strange hearing the worst part of my life described as helpful. I know, she said, but it is. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the wall for almost 2 full minutes before Natalie stepped in with a worried look. She sat beside me without asking questions. Her presence alone kept the panic from swallowing me whole. Later that evening, the next wave hit. The HR email came first. I opened it, expecting a routine notification. But instead, I found a formal message stating someone had filed a complaint accusing me of being aggressive and threatening toward a female coworker. My stomach dropped. I barely interacted with coworkers in person. I read the sentence twice, then handed the phone to Natalie. She frowned. He didn't. He did, I whispered. It took 3 days for HR to finish their investigation. 3 days of knowing John was trying to paint me as unstable, dangerous, unprofessional. 3 days of having to sit through virtual interviews where I calmly explained I had no idea who would accuse me of something so bizarre. When HR concluded there was no evidence to support the claim, I felt relief, but only briefly. Because that same evening, a police officer knocked on Natalie's door. Natalie opened it immediately alert. The officer asked if I was Deborah. My heart kicked into a sprint. He explained politely that a complaint had been made. John claimed I had been stalking him, harassing him, showing up at his workplace, following him. I felt something inside me crack slow and painful. I've been here, I said, my voice small but steady. I haven't stepped foot near his job. I haven't even spoken to him. Natalie bristled. Officer, you can see her phone. She has him blocked. I offered the device. He reviewed the logs, nodded, and said gently, I suspected as much. His story didn't add up, but I had to follow protocol. He left without filing anything. I sank onto the couch, staring at my trembling hands. Natalie knelt beside me. He's unraveling. That's what people do when they lose control of their narrative. I believed her, but that didn't stop the fear crawling up my throat. I wasn't afraid of John hurting me physically. I was afraid of the version of me he was trying to create unstable, erratic, dangerous. By week 3, John had hired a new attorney. The aggressive type, the kind who believes intimidation is a legal strategy. Suddenly, I was being served motions claiming John deserved financial support from me, that he'd sacrificed career opportunities for our relationship, that he was entitled to compensation. John earned more than I did. It would have been laughable if it wasn't happening in real time. His family joined in next. His mother called my mother. His sister messaged Natalie. His aunt, whom I'd met twice, wrote a paragraph-long text insisting that I forgive John and restore stability. My mother called me afterward, furious on my behalf. They're lucky they're not within driving distance, she said. Absolutely lucky. But the only call that mattered came from John's father, a quiet man I once respected deeply. Deborah, he said softly, I don't want to take sides. I want to understand. John told us you misunderstood everything. I told him the truth. The restaurant, the phone records, the financial plotting, the threat of fake evidence. Silence stretched long on the line. Finally, he sighed. I don't know who my son is anymore, he said. When we hung up, I sat very still, letting the weight of that sentence settle. Later that night came the voicemail that made everything click into place. John's voice slurred, angry unraveling. You think you won, Deborah. You think you're smart. You have no idea what I know. You're going to regret this. I have things, evidence, things you did. Think carefully. I listened twice. There was nothing he could have. But that message told me one thing clearly. He was desperate. And desperate people stop thinking about consequences. That was the moment I realized defense wouldn't be enough. I needed to protect myself. And I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The courthouse smelled like cold air, an old paper sterile quiet, a place where lives were dismantled in orderly lines and stamped signatures. As Natalie and I walked inside for the first hearing, I felt as if I were stepping into someone else's story, someone braver, someone steadier. I kept waiting for the shaking in my hands to stop, but it never did. Amara met me in the hallway, calm as always. Today is mostly procedural, she said. But John's new attorney may try theatrics. Don't respond. Let me handle everything. The doors opened, and suddenly John was right there. He looked awful in a way I had never seen, deep circles under his eyes, hair unwashed, a tightness in his jaw that suggested sleepless nights and panic. But the moment his gaze found me, something else flickered across his face. Not remorse. Resentment. He hated that I was standing tall. He hated that Natalie was beside me. He hated that I wasn't falling apart the way he expected. His attorney, a broad-shouldered man with a showman's confidence, whispered something to him and smirked in my direction. We took our seats. The judge entered brisk and expressionless. John's side went first. His attorney stood and began a dramatic speech about emotional neglect, relationship breakdown, and a partner pushed to the edge after years of being dismissed. He had taken lines from old text arguments, simple everyday disagreements, and twisted them into some theatrical narrative about me being cold, uncommunicative, emotionally withholding. He waved printed screenshots like they were damning evidence. Your Honor, he said with authority, here is repeated proof that Ms. Howard refused to engage in conflict resolution. My client often reached out seeking communication comfort, even clarity. Instead, he received rejection. The judge examined a page. One message read, I'm exhausted. Can we talk later? Another, I'm in a meeting. Not now. The judge lowered her glasses, unimpressed. This is normal communication between adults, she said flatly. There's no abuse here. Continue. John's attorney faltered for a moment, then blustered on. Furthermore, Ms. Howard has... But he never got to finish. Amara stood. Your Honor, we have evidence far more relevant. She handed the court clerk a thick envelope. May I, the judge asked. Amara nodded. These are text messages between Mr. Henderson and Ms. Marina Hale spanning nearly 8 months. They include discussions of infidelity, intent to deceive, and deliberate financial planning aimed at disadvantaging my client. The judge opened the file and began reading silently. The courtroom was still so still I could hear the clock ticking somewhere behind us. Then the judge's eyebrows lifted. She flipped another page, then another. She exhaled sharply. One message from John read, She's clueless. Once everything's in the joint account, we'll be solid. Another from Marina. She won't see it coming. Just keep pushing about the renovation. And another from John 1 I hadn't seen until now. I'm done pretending. After the money is sorted, I'm leaving. The judge set the papers down. Mr. Henderson, she said slowly, these messages are extremely concerning. John shifted in his seat. His attorney tried to speak, but she raised a hand to silence him. This is not merely an affair, the judge continued. This is evidence of premeditated financial exploitation. The word exploitation echoed in my mind like a blow. John looked at me, eyes wide with something like betrayal, as if I had wronged him by letting the truth surface. His attorney sputtered. Your Honor, these texts are taken. They are taken directly from a subpoena of his device, the judge cut in sharply. They are admissible and credible. Moving on. The rest of the hearing was procedural, but John's entire strategy collapsed in one afternoon. The judge denied his temporary support request, stating plainly that there was no foundation for financial dependency. I felt the air return to my lungs for the first time in weeks. As we exited the courtroom, John rushed after me. Deborah, wait. Natalie stepped between us, but I raised a hand. It's fine. John looked at me like a man drowning who had just realized the water wasn't going to hold him up. I never meant for things to go this far, he said. You made it worse by dragging everything into court. I stared at him. You created everything that led to this. His jaw flexed. I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. Marina fed me things. She pressured me, but I didn't mean to. Destroy me, I asked quietly. Plan behind my back for months. Cheat, lie, manufacture, evidence, file, false reports. Which part didn't you mean? He looked away. I waited, hoping foolishly that I might see a glimpse of accountability, even a sliver of humanity. But when he finally met my eyes again, all I saw was self-preservation. You're really going to let them paint me as some kind of monster? They didn't paint anything, I said. You wrote your own story. His lips tightened. One day you'll realize you overreacted. Natalie stepped forward at that voice cold as steel. One day you'll realize she didn't. We walked away. Outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face, warm, startling, almost intrusive after the cold air inside. I inhaled deeply, but something heavy still clung to me. Freedom and grief are twins. They arrive together indistinguishable at first. Later that week, Amara called with more updates. John's attorney attempted one last tactic, filing a motion claiming I had hidden assets. Financial discovery took 3 weeks. They combed through everything: my accounts, taxes, work, income, credit history. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Meanwhile, the messages John and Marina had exchanged stayed in the record. They weren't just damaging, they were devastating. During one status hearing, the judge said directly to John, "I am deeply troubled by your conduct." The courtroom went silent. Even John's attorney didn't speak. The hearing ended quickly. Outside, as I gathered my things, I heard someone call my name. It was John's father. He approached slowly, his expression weighted with disappointment, not in me, but in the son he didn't recognize. "I'm sorry," he said, "for everything he's done, for everything you're going through." My throat tightened. "You don't owe me an apology." He shook his head gently. "Maybe not. But you deserve better. I hope you know that now." As he walked away, I realized his quiet sincerity hurt more than John's cruelty ever had. The truth had been peeled back layer by layer, and beneath it was something I hadn't expected, a sense of peace beginning to form. Fragile, small, but real. The case was nearing its end, but my story with John, the unraveling of it, was about to reach its last painful chapter. The morning the final hearing arrived, I woke before my alarm. The sky outside Natalie's guest room window was still dark, a deep blue that felt like the quiet stretch between an ending and a beginning. I lay there for a long moment listening to the faint hum of her house, steady, peaceful, safe. Everything mine hadn't been for too long. When I finally stood and got dressed, I expected to feel dread. Instead, there was only a strange, heavy calm, a sense that whatever happened today, something inside me had already closed. The courthouse was colder this time, or maybe I just noticed it more. John was already there when I arrived with Amara. He didn't look at me at first. He kept staring at the floor, shoulders slumped, face gaunt. Whatever illusion of control he'd been clinging to had crumbled weeks ago. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Then we began. John's attorney started with a last-ditch attempt to twist reality. He presented screenshots of arguments again, insisting they proved emotional abuse. He claimed I had denied John affection, support, communication. The judge didn't hide her irritation. "These are ordinary disagreements," she said sharply. "They are not abusive. Move on." John's attorney then shifted to claiming I had hidden assets. Amara countered immediately, reminding the court that full financial discovery had already been conducted and nothing questionable was found. The judge nodded. "I see no evidence of financial concealment. Continue." Finally, Amara stood. She handed the judge a small binder. "This contains the full text messages between Mr. Henderson and Ms. Marina Hale showing intent to deceive, manipulate, and financially exploit Ms. Howard." The judge opened the binder, flipping through page after page. The silence in the room grew dense. John stared at the table, jaw clenched. His attorney sat stiffly, hands folded, knowing what was coming. After several minutes, the judge looked up. "Mr. Henderson, your conduct throughout this relationship and legal process has been deeply concerning. These messages demonstrate clear intent to deceive and financially harm Ms. Howard. The court does not take that lightly." John swallowed hard. His throat bobbed once, twice. The judge continued. "Given the evidence, the court awards the home solely to Ms. Howard. Mr. Henderson will receive compensation limited only to his contribution toward the kitchen renovation." A murmur rippled through the room. $12,000. That was it. The house John had plotted to claim his supposed leverage, his imagined victory, was gone. My lungs loosened. The pressure on my sternum eased slowly, painfully, like something long stuck finally shifting free. The judge turned the page. "As for financial accounts, Ms. Howard will retain her individual assets. Shared accounts will be divided according to the contributions documented. Mr. Henderson's request for long-term support is denied." John's attorney tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "The court does grant rehabilitative support to Mr. Henderson for 18 months, given the intertwined nature of their household. $1,100 per month." The number was far lower than he had demanded. It was in every sense mercy. The judge closed the binder. "This case is concluded." A gavel struck, a sharp final sound. Everyone stood. John did too, but he didn't move. He just stared at the judge's bench long after she'd stepped away, as if hoping something there might change if he waited long enough. I gathered my things. My fingers barely trembled. My heartbeat was steady for the first time in months. When I stepped into the hallway, he followed. "Deborah," he said, voice hoarse. I stopped. Natalie wasn't with me this time. Amar had already stepped into another conference room. It was just the two of us in the long corridor lined with marble and silence. He took a step closer. Was all of this worth it? Tearing everything apart. I studied him. Really studied him for the first time since the restaurant. His eyes were exhausted. His posture defeated. Not humbled. Just angry at losing. I answered quietly. You tore it apart. I just stopped trying to tape it back together. He flinched, but only for a second. You didn't have to drag it through court, he said. We could have handled it privately. You made me look like a monster. You made yourself look like that, I replied. All I did was bring the truth into a room where it couldn't hide. He stepped closer, still lowering his voice. I was confused. Marina told me things. She said you'd never fight for me. A sad smile tugged at my lips. She was wrong. I fought for us for years. You just didn't notice until I stopped. He exhaled shakily. She left me, you know, as soon as her husband filed. She said she couldn't handle the chaos. His voice cracked. I lost everything. I didn't respond. He looked at me, searching for pity, forgiveness, softness, anything familiar to cling to. I didn't offer any. I hope you're happy, he whispered, bitterness souring every word. You ruined my life. I held his gaze, calm, steady, almost gentle. You ruined your own life, I said quietly. I just refused to let you ruin mine too. His face froze, like the words hit somewhere he wasn't prepared to feel. Then I turned and walked away. Outside the courthouse, the air was warm, brighter than it had been all week. I stood on the steps for a moment, letting sunlight fill the places that had been cold for too long. That afternoon, I returned to my house for the first time in months. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and felt an ache I wasn't expecting. The rooms looked the same, but didn't feel the same. The walls still remembered him. The shadows still carried pieces of the life I thought we'd had. So I began changing it. I repainted the bedroom soft sage instead of the icy gray he'd chosen. I moved the furniture. I opened windows that had stayed shut for too long. Every change, every brushstroke, every adjustment was a quiet reclaiming of myself. Days passed, then weeks. Sometimes healing showed up in small ways. A peaceful morning coffee. The first night I slept through, the moment I realized I no longer checked my phone expecting a message from him. One evening, a new number texted me. I hope you're happy. You ruined my life. I stared at it for a moment. Then I blocked the number without replying. Peace isn't dramatic. It doesn't crash into your life. It arrives softly, step by step, when you stop opening the door to people who thrive in chaos. A month later, I found the photo on my phone, the one from the restaurant. For a long minute, I just looked at it, not with pain, not with anger, with clarity. That single moment hadn't ruined my life. It had saved me from living a lie for 10 more years. I finally deleted it. And for the first time in a very long time, the silence around me felt like freedom, not loss. My name is Jessica Newton. I'm 36 years old, and until yesterday I thought my life was stable, maybe not perfect, but predictable. I liked predictable. Predictable meant safe. Predictable meant I could go to work, drink my afternoon coffee, come home to my husband, and trust that whatever we had was solid enough to last. I never imagined that one unexpected schedule change would be the thing that tore everything apart. Yesterday, the project deadline at my office got pushed. My manager told our team, go home at 2:00 p.m. Enjoy the early day. You've earned it. It was the first time in months I'd left work before sunset. I remember feeling almost giddy walking to my car, like a teenager skipping class, like someone stealing time back from the universe. My husband Gary is 34. He works in marketing at a mid-sized tech company. 3 years in, he'd climbed quickly, though. In hindsight, I wonder how much of that was his effort and how much was the influence of his boss, a recently transferred VP named Marina Holt. Sharp, charismatic, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made other people feel like background noise. Gary had been working late a lot. Big product launch, he'd say. Marina wants everything perfect. I believed him. Because that's what you do when you're married. You believe the person you chose. At 2:45 p.m., I pulled into our driveway. Gary's car was already there. Weird. He never beat me home on a weekday. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he forgot something. Maybe he wanted to surprise me with dinner plans. Gary used to do things like that years ago. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was warm, quiet, oddly still. Then I heard it. A noise from upstairs. Not a sick noise, not a TV noise, a rhythm, a pattern, a sound I recognized from every moment of intimacy we ever had, but sharper, faster, wrong. My brain tried to lie to me. Maybe he's watching a movie. Maybe he's exercising. Maybe... But your body knows. Your heart knows. There's a shift in the air when betrayal is near something visceral, primal, undeniable. I felt it before I even moved toward the stairs. I went up quietly. Our bedroom door was closed. The noises were clearer now, breathy, frantic, unmistakably human, and definitely not mine. For a moment, I stood there staring at the door, just breathing. My pulse felt like it was crawling up my throat, but something else settled over me too, a cold, eerie calm, the kind you feel right before you rip off a bandage. I opened the door, and there he was. Gary, my husband, in our bed, with Marina Holt, his boss, both naked, both frozen mid-movement, like someone hit pause on a scene no one was ever meant to see. Marina screamed first. Gary scrambled backward, yanking the sheet over himself, tripping halfway off the mattress. It would have been ridiculous if it wasn't my life detonating in real time. "Jessica, what are you doing home?" he yelled, as if I were the intruder. "I live here," I said. My voice didn't shake. That scared me more than anything. Marina still tangled in the sheet. Stammered Jessica, This was a strategy meeting." "A strategy meeting." I blinked. "A strategy meeting," I repeated slowly. "Yes," she insisted, trying to stand while still clutching the fabric to her chest. "For the campaign launch. We were discussing deliverables, and..." I held up a hand. "Please, don't embarrass both of us." Gary tried to put on his pants while sitting down, which meant he toppled sideways and hit his shoulder on the nightstand. In any other universe, I might have laughed. Not today. "Listen," he said breathlessly. "Jess, you have to understand." "You're right," I interrupted. "I should leave you to your meeting." Their eyes widened confusion, then panic. I stepped out of the room, closed the door, and slid the heavy old house bolt across the outside of the frame. The metal clanked, decisively echoing down the hallway like the end of something final. Immediately pounding. "What are you doing?" Gary shouted. "Open this door," Marina screamed. "Don't mind me," I said through the wood. "Finish your meeting." I walked downstairs, pulled out my phone, and searched Marina's name. Didn't take long to find her partner Claire, a woman she'd been married to for 10 years. Public profile. Mutual connections. A number I could easily access. I called. "Hello, hi," I said calmly. "Is this Claire Holt?" "Yes. Who's calling? I'm Jessica Newton. My husband works under your wife." A pause. "Okay, she's currently in my bedroom. With him. Naked. They're locked inside. I thought you deserved to know." Silence. "Then send me your address." I did. 15 minutes later, earlier than expected, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Claire standing stiff as steel fury radiating off her like heat. "Where?" "Upstairs," I said. "I'll show you." She didn't wait for me to finish the sentence. She ran. We reached the door. Claire pounded. "Open this door right now." From inside, "Claire, honey, I can explain. Open it." "I can't," Gary shouted. Jessica locked it. Claire turned to me. I shrugged, slid the bolt, stepped aside. She threw the door open. Gary and Marina were dressed now, poorly sloppily. Shame hanging off them thicker than clothes. Both sitting at opposite ends of the bed like scolded children. Claire let out a laugh, a dangerous one. "So she said this was a strategy meeting." Marina started crying. Gary looked at me like I was supposed to save him. "I didn't." Claire pointed at her wife. "Pack your things. We're done." Marina whimpered. Gary froze. Claire glanced at me. "You should divorce him and keep every shred of evidence." "Already planning on it," I said. She nodded once, sharp as a blade, and left. When she was gone, I looked at Gary. "You have 1 hour," I said. "Pack your things and get out." "Jess, please, can we just talk?" "No." My voice stayed calm, unshaken, cold. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine." I walked downstairs, called a lawyer, and waited. 45 minutes later, Gary came down with 2 suitcases, eyes red, voice small. "I'll stay with my brother." "Great." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Okay." I opened the door. "Goodbye, Gary." When he stepped outside, I locked the door behind him. Not with anger, not with grief. Just finality. I sat on the couch for hours after that, just breathing, just existing, just realizing my life had split cleanly in two before the door locked and after. The morning after everything happened, I woke up to 36 missed calls and 12 voicemails from Gary. I didn't listen to any of them. I didn't need to. I knew exactly how he operated. The cycle always started with desperate apologies shifted into anger, then into denial, then into guilt, soaked begging, before looping right back into apology again. It was a performance I'd seen a dozen times over smaller issues, but now the stakes were different. I forwarded every message straight to my lawyer and put my phone on silent. By midday, Gary somehow found new numbers to call. From unknown caller after unknown caller, each ignored. Then the texts began as relentless as they were predictable. Jess, please, we need to talk. You misunderstood everything. You humiliated me. Why would you invite her wife? You've ruined my career. It was a mixture of shifting blame, pity tactics, and defensive rage. I responded once exactly as my lawyer instructed, please direct all communication through my attorney. His contact information is in your email. That single message seemed to push a button inside him because the next 10 minutes brought nearly 50 new texts ranging from accusations to sobbing confessions to frantic claims that I was destroying the marriage. I read none of them. I simply kept forwarding everything to my lawyer. Later that evening, my phone rang again, this time a number I didn't recognize, but with a familiar area code. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman spoke, her voice tight and controlled. Jessica. This is Claire Holt. The name immediately grounded me. Marina's wife. The woman who had marched past me and straight into the bedroom where her marriage was unraveling. I braced myself, unsure if she had called to lash out. Instead, she thanked me. Not politely, not softly, but with a raw honesty that caught me off guard. She said she had suspected Marina for months that their relationship had been unraveling quietly for some time, and that my call had given her the confirmation she needed to stop questioning her own intuition. She asked if I had evidence she could provide to her lawyer. Photos, messages, anything. I told her I'd send everything I had. Her gratitude wasn't warm, it was sharp. Steady, the kind of gratitude shared between two women who had both been lied to by people they loved. When she hung up, I actually felt a strange sense of solidarity, though it did nothing to lessen the heaviness in my chest. That moment of calm didn't last long. An hour later, my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I dreaded seeing, Ryan Newton, Gary's brother. I answered, already knowing what the call would be. Ryan didn't waste time with pleasantries. He launched straight into an emotional plea about how devastated Gary was, how he wasn't eating or sleeping, how I needed to be compassionate and take him back. When I calmly refused, Ryan accused me of being heartless, cold, destructive. I listened silently until he finally admitted, without realizing he'd done so, that the affair had been going on for 6 weeks. Then he tried to backtrack, but the damage was done. The guilt-tripping intensified. He told me I was ruining the entire family. I let him speak, then ended the conversation by reminding him that Gary had made his choices without any concern for how they affected me or anyone else. I hung up, blocked the number, and sat there in the quiet, unsurprised, but still disappointed. Gary's family had always defended him reflexively, always treating him as someone who needed cushioning from the real world. They expected me to be part of that cushion. They were about to learn I wouldn't be. The next morning, my lawyer called with updates. His tone was matter-of-fact, but tinged with amusement, as though he'd seen this exact scenario play out before. Gary, through a lawyer friend who clearly had no understanding of family law, had sent preliminary divorce demands. Half the house, which I bought before the marriage, half my retirement accounts, 5 years of spousal support, and full possession of the car that I thought he was still paying for. My lawyer actually laughed while reading them aloud. When I asked what we should do, he calmly explained that we would respond with the actual legal reality. Everything belonged to me, and Gary had committed clear documented adultery. He also advised me to stop making car payments. Since the title was in my name, the car legally belonged to me alone. Before I could fully process that, my lawyer added one last piece of information. Gary had been fired. So had Marina. Terminated for cause ethical misconduct. And in a twist, I wasn't expecting Claire was the reason it happened. She had connections on the board and wasted no time pushing for accountability. I just sat there absorbing the cascade of consequences that had started with a single impulsive decision in my bedroom. My lawyer spoke gently, then reminding me that none of this was my burden. These were Gary's consequences, not mine. But the day wasn't done with me. That afternoon, Gary's mother called, furious and tearful, demanding to know what I had done to her son. I stayed calm as she shouted accusations, insisting I should have protected the family, that I had humiliated Gary, that calling Marina's wife was vindictive. I listened until she finished, then told her that Gary's choices, not mine, had brought him here. She tried one last tactic, telling me I was abandoning him when he needed me most. For a split second, old habits tugged at me, the instinct to smooth things over, to take responsibility for emotions that weren't mine. But it faded quickly. I told her I was done being his safety net. She told me I would regret it. I hung up, blocked her number, and inhaled the quiet of my home. For the first time in years, I felt something close to clarity. Gary's affair hadn't just shattered our marriage, it had exposed everything I had been carrying alone. And as strange as it felt realizing this, brought a kind of relief. Gary hadn't just broken our life together, he had freed me from the version of myself that constantly cleaned up his messes. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time it would be on my terms. The following days blurred together into a strange mix of legal documents, emotional whiplash, and the steady realization that Gary was far more unprepared for the consequences of his actions than he had ever been for the responsibilities of marriage. I spent most mornings forwarding new messages to my lawyer, messages that arrived despite Gary being told repeatedly to stop contacting me directly. He alternated between rage-filled paragraphs, accusing me of setting him up, and long, meandering apologies that sounded more like rehearsed speeches than remorse. My lawyer's advice was simple: don't respond, document everything. By midweek, things escalated. Gary's so-called lawyer friend, a contract attorney who had apparently decided family law couldn't be that different, sent over a second draft of divorce proposals. This one was even more absurd than the first. He was now demanding temporary spousal support access to half of my investment accounts rights, to furnishings I purchased years before I ever met him, and reimbursement for emotional suffering caused by the exposure of his affair. My lawyer skimmed the document, then leaned back in his chair with an expression that could only be described as delighted disbelief. He told me not to worry. Judges see cases like this all the time, and Gary was setting himself up for a spectacular failure. The emotional manipulation intensified. Gary called from new numbers, left voicemails, ranging from dramatic threats about losing everything to pitiful muttering that he couldn't survive without me. He also started rewriting history, claiming the affair began because I wasn't affectionate enough, or because I was too focused on my career, or because Marina pressured him and he didn't know how to say no. It was an exhausting parade of excuses, all of which neatly absolved him of responsibility. Once again, I responded only through legal channels. On Thursday afternoon, things took a darker turn. Gary attempted to show up at the house. I saw his car from the window before he even made it to the porch. I didn't open the door. He knocked for 10 minutes, first pleading, then shouting, then demanding entry because we're still married and I have rights. I called my lawyer immediately, who instructed me to contact the police. When the officers arrived, they checked the property records, confirmed the house was solely in my name, and told Gary he needed to leave. He argued with them until they threatened to arrest him for trespassing. His expression, shock, betrayal, disbelief, was almost surreal. It was as though he genuinely couldn't comprehend that his choices now had consequences he couldn't charm or guilt his way out of. Eventually, he drove off tires, squealing down the street. That night, I received a string of messages from Ryan. He accused me of going nuclear, claimed I was trying to ruin Gary's life, said I should have handled everything privately. I deleted each message without responding. Whatever image Gary wanted to paint of me to his family wasn't my concern anymore. I was done trying to win the approval of people who never once held him accountable for anything. But the most emotionally draining encounter came the following morning, when someone knocked on my door for nearly 20 minutes. At first I assumed it was Gary again, but when I checked the camera, I saw his mother pacing on the porch with a tissue in her hand. I didn't open the door. I knew what would happen if I did. She would pour her pain and disappointment into my living room and expect me to absorb all of it like a sponge. Instead, I listened through the door as she cried, begged, and tried every angle imaginable: guilt, shame, pity, fear. "He's falling apart," she said. "He needs you. Your pride is going to destroy him. Please, Jessica, don't throw him away. Don't destroy this family." When I didn't answer, she became frustrated, insisting that this was partially my fault, that I must have done something to push him toward someone else. I stood completely still, letting her words flow past me like smoke. Eventually she left, but not before sliding a handwritten note under the door. I picked it up, read 2 lines, and threw it away. Later that afternoon, I had a meeting at my lawyer's office to prepare for the upcoming hearing. He had gathered every piece of evidence we had. So far, timestamps, photos, text messages, call logs, social media posts showing Gary and Marina together at odd hours, HR termination documents, eyewitness statements, and even notes from Claire about previous suspicions she'd had before everything exploded. When everything was laid out in one place, the story became painfully clear. Gary hadn't slipped once. He had invested effort planning secrecy and emotional energy into another relationship while I was busy holding our life together. There was no version of this where he could claim temporary insanity or a moment of weakness. It was a pattern, not an accident. My lawyer explained what would happen next. Gary's legal demands would be dismissed almost immediately. The judge would review the evidence, and because the house was mine before the marriage, because the affair occurred in the marital home, and because Gary had been terminated for cause, the court would almost certainly side with me on every major point. He also recommended filing for a temporary restraining order to prevent Gary from attempting any further surprise visits. I agreed. It was time to create actual distance, legal, emotional, and physical. That evening, as I tried to unwind my phone, buzzed with one final surprise, a message from Claire. She updated me on her own case, letting me know that Marina was now living in a hotel and that her divorce attorney was aggressively pursuing a settlement. "You did the right thing," she wrote. "Even if it feels messy right now, you did what needed to be done, both for you and for me." Her message was unexpectedly grounding, a reminder that even in chaos, truth had a way of creating clarity. By the end of the week, the temporary hearing was scheduled. Gary had exhausted every manipulative tactic he could think of, and it was clear he was crumbling under pressure. Meanwhile, I felt strangely steady. Not happy, not healed, just steady. For the first time in a long while, I could feel the ground beneath me instead of constantly bracing for the next emotional disaster. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was the unraveling of years of imbalance. Gary was no longer the center of my life. He was simply the source of a problem I was now solving. The morning of the temporary court hearing arrived with the kind of heavy, muted stillness that usually precedes a storm. I woke up before my alarm, not because I was anxious, but because something inside me felt alert in a way it hadn't in years. My lawyer had prepared me thoroughly, walking me step by step through what would happen, what Gary's side might attempt, and why none of it would hold up. Even so, the idea of sitting in the same room with Gary after everything triggered a dull ache behind my ribs. When I arrived at the courthouse and saw him in the hallway, the ache sharpened, but didn't break me. Gary looked deflated. His hair was unkempt, his face blotchy, his suit wrinkled like he had slept in it for days. Marina wasn't there, of course she wasn't. She had her own legal catastrophes to deal with. But Gary wasn't alone. Standing beside him was his lawyer friend, a man who wore an ill-fitting blazer and clutched a leather portfolio, as if holding it tightly enough might magically transform him into someone qualified for this situation. My lawyer greeted me with his usual calm. "Ready?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Yes," I said, because it was true. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I was done carrying Gary's weight. Inside, the judge entered with a brisk efficiency that suggested she had seen every version of marital collapse imaginable and was not in the mood for theatrics. She reviewed our paperwork silently for several minutes, flipping through evidence with an expression that revealed nothing. Then she looked up. "Ms. Newton," she began, "you're seeking sole temporary possession of the marital home, the car titled in your name, and exclusive control of the remaining joint accounts until the final hearing. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." And Mr. Newton, the judge, shifted her gaze. "You are seeking spousal support access to the house and division of assets." Gary nodded, clearing his throat. "Yeah, Your Honor and I." My lawyer stood. "If I may, Your Honor, the respondent's demands are not legally sound considering the circumstances." The judge lifted a hand. "We'll get to that." She invited Gary's lawyer friend to present his case first, which was a mistake only in that it prolonged the inevitable. He fumbled through his argument, claiming that Gary had been emotionally manipulated into the affair, that he was coerced by workplace dynamics, and that I had overreacted by escalating the situation. He framed Gary as a fragile victim of circumstance, a man overwhelmed by a demanding environment. At one point, he said Mrs. Holt Marina's wife was unnecessarily involved by Ms. Newton, which constitutes emotional aggression. The judge looked up sharply. "Counselor, are you suggesting that informing a spouse of an active affair is emotional aggression?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I I mean the manner in which the judge cut him off. Let's move on. When it was my lawyer's turn, he approached the bench with the confidence of someone who had built an airtight case. He presented everything calmly, the timestamps, the photos from the bedroom, Gary's messages, the HR termination for cause, the pattern of deception, the documented attempts Gary made to force his way back into the house, and the police report that resulted. Each piece of evidence felt like a small, precise stitch in a fabric designed to hold me up instead of unravel me. The judge listened without expression. When he finished, she turned to Gary directly. Mr. Newton, do you dispute the fact that you engaged in an extramarital relationship with your supervisor in the marital home? Gary hesitated, then shook his head. No, Your Honor. But She didn't let him continue. Do you dispute that you lost your employment due to this conduct? He looked at the floor. No. Do you dispute that you attempted to re-enter the property without legal right and refused to leave when asked? His voice broke slightly. No, but The judge held up a hand. I do not need explanations. I need answers. Gary whispered, no. The courtroom went quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin. The judge exhaled slowly. Mr. Newton, your claims for spousal support and property division lack legal foundation. Your marital misconduct is well documented. Your loss of employment is a direct consequence of your choices, not your wife's. And your attempt to re-enter the home after being instructed to leave demonstrates poor judgment regarding boundaries. She turned to me. Ms. Newton, your requests are granted in full. You are awarded sole temporary possession of the marital residence, sole use of the vehicle titled in your name, and exclusive access to joint accounts pending final division. Additionally, given your spouse's repeated attempts to contact you outside of proper channels and his attempt to enter the property without consent, I am granting a temporary restraining order requiring Mr. Newton to remain at least 100 feet away from you and the residence. Gary's head snapped up, eyes widening. Your Honor, please, I'm homeless. I have nowhere to go. The judge regarded him with a calm, unmovable expression. Your circumstances, while unfortunate, are of your own making. You should seek alternate housing and professional guidance. This court will not require Ms. Newton to shoulder the burden of your actions. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The hearing ended shortly afterward. I stood gathering my belongings, ready to walk out of that courtroom and into the air again. Gary moved toward me instinctively, as if the familiar gravity of our past could pull me back into his orbit. But my lawyer stepped between us immediately. Not today, he said quietly. Not anymore. Gary stopped. His face crumpled in a way I hadn't seen before. Less anger, more realization. Finally understanding that the version of me who absorbed everything and asked for nothing was gone. I didn't speak to him. I didn't need to. Outside the courthouse, I paused for a moment on the steps. The sky had cleared, the air was cool, and for the first time since everything began, I felt something close to weightlessness. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. A gentle, undeniable lightness created by the simple fact that the legal storm had not swallowed me whole. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a message from Claire. My hearing went well. I'm getting the house, most of the assets. Marina's moving out tomorrow. Thank you again for everything. I stared at the message for a long moment, thinking about how betrayal had interconnected our lives in ways neither of us had chosen yet. Both of us were now clawing our way out of. I typed back, I'm glad you're getting closure. I think I am too. Then I put my phone away, inhaled deeply, and finally let my shoulders fall. For years, I had carried Gary's crises, emotions, insecurities, and mistakes like they were my own. But in that moment, standing on courthouse steps with the future still uncertain, but finally mercifully mine again, I felt the truth settle inside me. I was done carrying him. I was finally carrying myself. 2 months passed between the temporary hearing and the final court date, 2 strangely peaceful months in which I relearned what silence felt like, what a day without emotional turbulence felt like, what it meant to inhabit my own home without tiptoeing around someone else's moods. I didn't realize how much noise Gary had brought into my life until it was gone. The house had its own quiet rhythm now, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the familiar creak of the hallway floorboards, the steady tick of the kitchen clock. Sounds that had always been there, but had never really had space to breathe. I reclaimed the bedroom first. I repainted the walls, trading the muted taupe Gary insisted on for a deeper, calming slate gray. I bought new bedding, clean crisp, untouched by betrayal. I replaced the old dresser with one I picked entirely on my own, without weighing whether Gary would call it too modern. I even rearranged the furniture, shifting the energy of the room so completely that sometimes I forgot it had ever been the scene of something so devastating. It felt like a small, private victory. I revisited hobbies long abandoned. I took long evening walks after work, joined a pottery class, rediscovered the pleasure of drinking coffee slowly in the morning instead of rushing out the door. My coworkers noticed the change. They said I seemed lighter, more present, more confident. And they were right. I felt a version of myself I hadn't seen in years, returning one that Gary had slowly eroded with constant demands for reassurance, validation, and patience, all while giving little of it back. When the final hearing finally arrived, I didn't feel fear. I didn't even feel anxiety. I felt ready, ready for everything to end, ready to put the final period on a chapter that had gone on too long. The courtroom this time was smaller, quieter. Gary looked even more worn than before, hollow-eyed with a gray stubble shadowing his jaw. His lawyer friend was there again, looking exhausted and deeply out of his depth. Marina was not in attendance. She was, according to Claire, busy trying to salvage what remained of her own professional life. The judge reviewed the submissions one last time, her expression steady and unyielding. She recited the facts of the case, the evidence presented, the legal precedents, and then delivered her decision with the cool clarity of someone who had long ago detached themselves from the emotional carnage of marriage dissolution. The house awarded to me, the car mine entirely, retirement accounts retained in full, savings I would keep 80%, Gary would receive 20%, alimony none, legal fees each party responsible for their own. Gary looked like he'd been punched. He tried one last time to argue that the affair shouldn't overshadow years of marriage, that he had been under enormous stress, that he was now financially ruined, that he deserved compassion. But the judge shut him down with a single sentence that echoed in me long after she said it. Consequences are not cruelty, Mr. Newton. They are accountability. And that was that. The marriage that I had poured time, energy, and effort into was officially declared over with the stroke of a pen. When we walked out of the courtroom, Gary took a step toward me, his eyes glassy with desperation. My lawyer moved in front of me immediately, reminding him of the restraining order still in place. Gary stopped, but he didn't leave. He stood there in the hallway, speaking quietly across the space between us. Jess, I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. His voice trembled, and for a brief moment, the old version of me, the one who used to soothe him, comfort him, clean up after him, nearly resurfaced. But it didn't. I simply looked at him and said, I didn't destroy anything, Gary. You just finally ran out of places to hide from what you did. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. He turned away and walked down the hallway. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was clarity, a clean, sharp understanding that sometimes closure isn't about winning, it's about no longer wanting anything from the person who hurt you. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my home and my life with a sense of ownership I had long forgotten. I sold the furniture Gary had always insisted we compromise on and bought pieces that reflected my style. I started cooking again, not rushed weekday meals, but slow, thoughtful ones that filled the house with warmth instead of tension. I started hosting small gatherings with friends, rediscovered laughter that didn't feel tight or cautious, and allowed myself the space to enjoy being alone without feeling lonely. Claire updated me on her divorce, too. She had secured her house the majority of assets and a generous support agreement. Marina was struggling, jumping between temporary jobs, her reputation in shambles. It was strange how our lives had run parallel. Two women betrayed by partners who thought secrecy gave them immunity, both now standing on the other side with stronger boundaries and clearer priorities. Then one day I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from Ryan. You won. He has nothing. I hope you're satisfied. I read it once slowly, then set the phone down without replying. His message wasn't about Gary. It was about the family's belief that I had somehow taken something from them when all I had done was stop giving everything away. They saw Gary's downfall as my victory. But the truth was simpler. He had dismantled his own life long before I ever intervened. And I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt peace. For the first time in years, I slept through the night without waking up to tension or dread or the heavy sense that I was responsible for holding someone else's world together. As I stood in my newly painted living room on a quiet Sunday morning, sunlight spilling across the hardwood floors, I understood something with perfect clarity. Gary hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he had cleared the path back to myself. And while I wouldn't thank him for it, I wouldn't regret a single decision that led me here. Some people think leaving is the hard part, but sometimes staying, enduring, absorbing, shrinking to fit someone else's needs is far harder. I had done the hardest part for years without realizing it. Now finally I was free. My name is Carol Camerata. I'm 36, and I'm writing this from a hotel room that smells like lemon disinfectant, old wallpaper glue, and the faint trace of someone else's cigarettes. It's 3:07 a.m. now. I keep glancing at the glowing digital clock on the nightstand like it might suddenly reveal a different reality, one where the last 6 hours didn't happen, where my life didn't tilt on its axis, where I wasn't sitting here with clothes I didn't pack, and a heart that feels metallic, scraped out, and hollow. But this is the world I have now, and this is how my story begins. I had been married to my husband, 34, for 7 years. We weren't perfect, but I thought we were steady, predictable in a way that felt safe rather than stale. We had recently bought a fixer-upper, a 2-story house with peeling yellow paint and a sagging porch, but a skyline view that made strangers stop on the sidewalk. We spent 8 months pouring every ounce of our savings into making it livable. Classic millennial dream. Buy the worst house on the best street, renovate, build equity, build a future. My husband loved the idea of design vision. I love spreadsheets that kept us from financial ruin. Somehow, the two of us met in the middle. 3 months ago, we hired a general contractor, a woman named Taryn, to manage the kitchen overhaul and the master bath addition. She was in the house nearly every day, wearing paint-splattered jeans, steel-toe boots, and that casual confidence that made my husband laugh a little harder than necessary whenever she joked about renovation disasters. She petted our dog, complimented my coffee, remembered. I liked extra whipped cream on hot chocolate, tiny friendliness that at the time I attributed to her wanting good client referrals. I didn't know it was my first warning sign. Yesterday, technically, the day before, since we're long past midnight now, my afternoon meeting got canceled. A supply chain disaster spiraled out of nowhere, my client pushed everything back, and suddenly I had free hours I didn't expect. I considered texting my husband, but the idea of surprising him with an early dinner felt sweet. In a way we hadn't indulged in for a while. I imagined him in our half-renovated living room, surrounded by sawdust and plastic sheeting, and maybe we'd step out for sushi or burgers. Something spontaneous. Something that reminded us we were still a couple beneath all the construction dust. So at 2:15 p.m., I pulled into the driveway. Taryn's truck was already there, nothing unusual, though she usually stayed until 4. I remember thinking I should have grabbed pastries or something for them. When I unlocked the front door, I did it quietly, not because I suspected anything, but because the remodel meant unexpected noises could be dangerous. I didn't want to walk in on a power saw mid-cut, but the house wasn't noisy. It was silent in a way that immediately felt wrong. Then I heard a sound soft at first, then unmistakable, a laugh. My husband's laugh. He only used that laugh after a couple of drinks or when he was trying too hard to impress someone. Something about the rhythm of it made my stomach fold into itself. A woman murmured something in response. Her voice was low, confident, and intimate. Taryn. I stood completely still, holding the doorknob like it might anchor me to the version of my life I thought I had. Then the words drifted out, careless, amused, edged with secrecy. You really think she hasn't noticed? My husband's voice was light teasing. She's obsessed with the budget, Taryn whispered back. She doesn't pay attention to anything else. Besides, she thinks I'm working on the plumbing right now. Taryn laughed softly. I am working on plumbing. A beat. Just not the kind she thinks. It felt like someone slid a metal rod through my spine. My first instinct wasn't to burst through the doorway or scream. It wasn't to run or cry. It was clarity cold, abrupt, and terrifying in how calm it made me. I realized that if I mishandled this even by a breath, the narrative could spiral into something he said versus she said. I could be painted as hysterical, irrational, emotional. I could lose the upper hand before I even knew the full shape of the betrayal. Instead, I stepped backward out onto the porch, closing the door quietly behind me. I sat in my car, staring at my phone, strangely steady. My hands weren't shaking. My heartbeat wasn't racing. It felt like I was watching a movie about someone who happened to have my same haircut and wedding band. I scrolled to my lawyer's contact, a college friend who'd once told me he thrived on conflict and courtroom battles the way athletes thrived on adrenaline. He answered on the second ring. Carol. Everything okay? You sound compressed. My husband, I said. He's inside with Taryn. I heard them talking. They're having an affair. My voice didn't crack. I didn't recognize it. His tone dropped instantly into professional mode. Where are you? In the house. No, outside. Do not confront them. Do not yell. Do not touch anything. Do you have a key? Yes. Good. Go inside quietly. If they're in a compromising position, take photos or videos. Don't speak to them. Don't argue. Don't accuse. Once you have evidence, leave immediately and drive straight to my office. I'm drafting the separation paperwork now. I hung up, inhaled until my lungs hurt, and walked back toward the door. The hallway was dim, lit only by the slanted afternoon sunlight slipping through plastic sheeting. I stepped through it, careful, silent. Voices grew louder, soft laughter, the rustle of fabric, a clink of chopsticks on a dish. Through a narrow tear in the plastic divider, I saw them. Not tangled on the couch, not caught in an obvious act. What I saw was somehow worse. They were sitting close together on the new beige sectional, my expensive, impractical purchase. Sharing takeout sushi like it was a date night. Her legs were tucked under her. His hand rested lightly on her knee. She leaned into him as he fed her a piece of tuna roll. It was domestic, comfortable, like they'd been this way for weeks. Like I was the outsider in my own home. I lifted my phone and pressed record. When I stepped through the plastic, it crinkled loudly enough to make them both jerk upright. Taryn's foot knocked over a cup of soy sauce, leaving a dark stain spreading across the rug we bought on sale but loved anyway. My husband went pale. Carol, you're home early. I didn't speak. I pointed the camera at him, then at her, then at the spilled sushi and their intertwined legs. 5 silent seconds. Taryn stood abruptly, her shirt half untucked. What are you doing? You can't just... I took a photo of her, my expression unreadable. My husband's voice cracked. Carol, please wait, we can talk. But I was already turning away. He followed me through the doorway, his voice becoming frantic. This isn't what it looks like. It was just lunch. I kept walking, down the steps, into the car, locked the door. He stood in the doorway, helpless, shocked, almost small. I didn't look back. I drove straight to my lawyer's office, signed everything he put in front of me, and by the time the sun set, the separation petition was filed. My husband didn't even know yet. All he knew was that I left. Now here I am, staring at peeling hotel curtains, realizing my life didn't just break it, split cleanly, surgically, like someone cut it open with a blade. Tomorrow I have to return to the house with a police escort to gather my belongings. Wish me strength. 5 days. It's astonishing how quickly time can dissolve when your life is collapsing in slow motion. By the morning of the police escort, the adrenaline that had carried me through the first 24 hours had burned out completely, leaving something quieter, heavier, and more hollow than shock detachment. Pure, icy detachment. I needed it. If I let emotion seep in, I would crack open like old plaster. The officers were polite, but distant, the kind of neutrality you expect from people who have seen the entire spectrum of domestic disasters. They called it a civil standby. We're here to keep everyone calm, one of them said, hands resting lightly on his belt. Translation. We're not therapists. We're bodyguards for the truth. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed something instantly. Taryn's truck was parked in the exact same place as the day I left. Not slightly shifted, not missing, not even angled differently. She had not gone home, or maybe she hadn't had a home to return to. The idea flashed through my mind, and I pushed it away. It didn't matter anymore. The officers walked ahead of me as I unlocked the door. They stepped inside first. My husband was in what used to be our kitchen, though. Kitchen felt generous now that most of it was gutted. He was wearing my robe tied loosely at the waist like he owned the place and the person who used to fill that robe. Taryn leaned against the half-finished counter beside him, sipping from one of my ceramic mugs. You can't be here, my husband said, pointing accusingly like he was the wrong party. I told you I don't feel safe with you. One of the officers stepped forward before I could reply. Sir, this is Ms. Camerata's legal residence. She has the right to enter and retrieve her property. Step aside. My husband immediately shifted his expression into something wounded, eyes wide, shoulders hunched, voice trembling on cue. He had always been a good actor when he wanted sympathy. Officer, he said, turning to the female cop, she abandoned me. She left without money, without explanation, and now she brings police to intimidate me. I ignored him completely and walked past them into the bedroom. The silence between the officers and the two of them felt thick like mud. I didn't want to stand there and listen to the script he always used when he needed to dodge accountability. When I reached the bedroom, I pulled out my suitcase, systematically folding my clothes, grabbing documents, my laptop, my passport, my birth certificate. Every item I touched felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to the version of me who used to care about grocery lists and laundry schedules. When I finally returned to the living room, Taryn was speaking to the male officer. Technically, she said with an air of authority she hadn't earned, I'm a tenant. I've been staying here to finish the renovations faster, so legally I have residency. She can't kick me out. I froze. A tenant, I asked, my voice flat. Taryn lifted her chin. Verbal agreement. Your husband and I agreed. That's valid in this state. The officer sighed deeply, like he hated that she wasn't completely wrong. Ma'am, he said to me with regret, if she can prove she established residency, eviction would have to be handled through civil court. It's not something we can enforce today. I looked from Taryn to my husband. Neither would meet my eyes. They were partners now, not only in betrayal, but in legal maneuvering. It was almost impressive how fast they had aligned. Fine, I said. Enjoy the house. The furnace is dying and the roof leaks. Hope your tenant agreement covers that. My husband's face tightened, but he didn't respond. I walked out. The officers followed. My life fit into one suitcase and a small safe box that held everything valuable enough to rescue from the wreckage. But the worst part was still ahead. That afternoon, I logged into our joint bank account, the one we use for the mortgage utilities and all the renovation expenses. The balance hit me like a slap, zeros and dollars. Every last cent, $12,000, had been transferred into my husband's personal account. No warning, no discussion. Just gone. Before the shock settled, my email pinged. It was an invoice from Taryn's company, although company was an exaggeration since it was just her and an aging truck. The invoice listed emergency plumbing, structural reinforcement, expedited work totaling $8,500 for work I knew she hadn't done. I called my lawyer immediately. Can they do this? I asked, pacing my tiny rental apartment, the walls too close and too beige. The money transfer looks bad for him, he said. It's not illegal before formal filing, but it's definitely ammunition. The invoice, if the work wasn't completed, that's fraud. And since they're involved romantically, it's likely collusion. What now? Now, he said evenly, we freeze everything. You stop contributing to the mortgage, stop paying utilities. If you fund anything now, you're subsidizing them. We'll file an emergency motion for sale of the marital home. I hesitated. If I stop paying the mortgage, my credit is going to take a hit. He sighed. Carol, you are not paying for your husband and his lover to live comfortably in the house you bought. Sometimes you lose points on your credit score to gain your life back. That line settled something inside me. When the utilities cutoff took effect, I sent a single text to my husband, the first communication since the day I walked out. Utilities are now in your name. Mortgage is your responsibility since you have exclusive use of the property. Lawyer says hi. 3 minutes later, he replied, Husband, you are a monster. The fridge is off. All the food is spoiling. How am I supposed to live? I typed, ask your tenant. Maybe she can fix it. His typing bubble exploded into nothing. Then came the flood. His mother called, screaming so loudly she didn't notice her phone cut out twice. You promised to care for him, so he made a mistake. You don't get to throw away a marriage because of one little betrayal. His father sent a text accusing me of being vindictive. His sister left a voicemail claiming I had abandoned him during a mental health crisis. None of them mentioned that he drained the bank account, or moved in his lover, or lied for months. Then the mutual friends split. Some sent me quiet texts of support. Others sent self-righteous messages implying I was cruel. You didn't have to cut the power, one friend lectured. I didn't cut the power, I said aloud to no one. I took my name off the bill. He had the money. He just didn't want to spend it on anything that wasn't Taryn. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt something other than numbness. I felt resolve. Because now it wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. They thought they were clever. They had no idea who they were dealing with. By the third week, the shock had transformed into something sharper and far more dangerous clarity, not the cool, detached kind that carried me through the hotel night breakdown, but a molten clarity anger forged into purpose. Because the more pieces my lawyer and I uncovered, the more obvious it became that my husband's betrayal hadn't been a moment of weakness. It was a strategy, a slow, methodical siphoning of our marriage, our finances, and our future. My lawyer put me in touch with a forensic accountant, a quiet, almost monk-like man, whose office looked like it had been assembled by a robot obsessed with symmetry. He introduced himself as the numbers guy, which I assumed was a joke until I realized he meant it. He handled spreadsheets like surgeons handled scalpels. Minimal words, maximum precision. Over the next 10 days, he peeled back the renovation invoices layer by layer. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, he finally called. "You need to come in." When I arrived, he had a single folder sitting in the middle of the table like a crime scene exhibit. "Walk me through it," I said. He opened the folder with a small, deliberate motion. "Your renovation invoices for the last 3 months show high-end materials, Italian marble, custom cabinets, premium fixtures. I cross-checked them with supplier records." He paused. "None of the materials were ordered." I felt my jaw tighten. "So where did the money go?" He turned the page, revealing a spreadsheet so color-coded it almost looked artistic. "Here's the pattern. Every time your husband approved a large payment to Taryn's company, a matching payment went from her personal account to pay down your husband's credit card bill. Or she bought things for him. He laundered marital funds through her invoices." Laundered. That word hit me harder than affair ever did. The accountant continued. "They weren't just cheating on you. They were using your own money to finance the relationship. Restaurants, hotel stays, gas for her truck, 2 payments on his phone, even a pair of concert tickets. The betrayal was no longer emotional, it was financial, calculated, coordinated." I sat back, breath measured but tight. "So this isn't just divorce." "No," he said calmly. "This is fraud, collusion, civil conspiracy." My lawyer was practically vibrating when he read the report. "We're filing a fraud claim, a breach of contract claim against Taryn, and a dissipation of assets claim against your husband. With this evidence, we can argue that the house sale proceeds go entirely to you." And so we filed the motions. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside a courtroom watching my husband walk in with the saddest Victorian orphan expression he could manufacture. He wore clothes I hadn't seen in years. Wrinkled, outdated, intentionally too big. He'd stripped himself of dignity on purpose to appear sympathetic. Taryn wasn't with him. Convenient. His lawyer, a woman I was certain he paid with the stolen $12,000, stood beside him, flipping papers dramatically as though the performance might sway the judge before anything was said. When the judge entered, everyone rose. Her expression alone told me she had zero tolerance for theatrics. My husband's lawyer began with a melodramatic flourish. "Your Honor, my client has been abandoned. Mrs. Camerata left him without warning or support. She cut water and has left him in severe financial hardship. We request temporary spousal support, $2,000 a month, and for her to resume paying the mortgage until the divorce is finalized." The judge tilted her head slightly. "Is the respondent currently living alone?" My husband swallowed. "Well, no, not always. For safety reasons, My lawyer cut in smoothly, handing the judge the forensic report, the bank statements, and the photos I'd taken. "Your Honor, the petitioner is currently cohabitating with the individual named in the fraud investigation. We have documented evidence of collusion, fraudulent invoices, and intentional dissipation of marital assets." The judge flipped through the photos. Each page turn sounded like a gavel. She examined the image of Taryn feeding him sushi on our expensive sectional, then glanced at him with raised eyebrows. "Sir is Ms. Taryn, living in the home with you." "She stays over sometimes," he mumbled. "For security." "And does she pay rent?" "No." "Let me understand," the judge said, voice cold. "You are requesting that your wife pay the mortgage for a home in which you reside with your companion, who is also implicated in a fraud case involving that same property." His lawyer tried to speak, but the judge held up a finger. Motion for temporary support denied. My husband wilted like a deflated tent, but the judge wasn't finished. Motion to list the marital home for sale granted. Proceeds to be held in escrow pending resolution of the fraud claims. I felt a sharp, precise satisfaction. Not joy, but justice. Justice with steel edges. After the ruling, the real estate agent scheduled a walkthrough to photograph the property for listing. That evening, the agent called me, her voice tight with confusion and barely concealed disgust. Ms. Camerata, the house is in an alarming condition. Construction zone, I guessed. Not construction, she said firmly. Damage, intentional damage. A cold sensation crept beneath my ribs. What kind of damage? There are holes in the drywall that aren't part of any renovation plan, trash piles in every corner, a strong odor of smoke, and... She hesitated. The kitchen cabinets appear to have been ripped out. Ripped out, I repeated slowly. Gone. Removed. Wires exposed. It looks like someone tried to take the fixtures. I drove there immediately, despite my lawyer warning me to stay away. But I didn't enter the house. I sat across the street, engine running heart-pounding. And that's when I saw it. Taryn's truck backed up to the garage door, piled high with boxes, plywood cabinet doors, and fixtures. My fixtures. She was stealing the materials she claimed to have installed, trying to salvage whatever she could before the lawsuit swallowed her whole. My husband emerged from the garage holding a toolbox, shouting something I couldn't hear, gesturing frantically as if losing the stolen materials physically pained him. Taryn was barking orders back at him, irritated, panicked. I called the police before I even realized I'd dialed. This time they didn't ask me to leave. This is theft, I told them, handing over the court order for the home sale. The materials were purchased with marital funds. She's removing fixtures. That's illegal. The officers confronted them immediately. Taryn protested. My husband shouted. Both pointed fingers. But neither had documentation. Neither had a single legal leg to stand on. The police ordered them to unload every stolen item. On the lawn. In the rain. My husband glared at me like I'd stabbed him. Taryn snapped at him to stop making it worse, and the look he threw her was equal parts betrayal and desperation, the beginning of cracks forming in whatever illusion they'd built together. He yelled across the lawn at me, "You're ruining our lives." But all I felt was distance. A widening gulf between who he used to be and who he had become the moment he chose deceit over honesty, collusion over partnership. As their stolen cabinets soaked in the rain, I realized something profound. They weren't building a life without me. They were dismantling one, piece by piece, and now it was collapsing on top of them. The rain didn't stop for hours. It fell in relentless sheets, washing mud across the lawn where Taryn and my husband had been forced to unload every stolen cabinet countertop and fixture. Watching them, two people who once felt untouchable reduced to scrambling around in the mud, shouting at officers and at each other, was surreal. Not satisfying, not joyful, just clarifying. Because there are two kinds of collapse, the explosive cinematic kind and the slow grinding kind that comes from structural failure. What I witnessed that afternoon was both. The house was disintegrating physically, their partnership emotionally, and their entire scheme legally. When the last wooden panel hit the soaked grass, Taryn threw her hands up in exasperation. "This is ridiculous," she snapped at the officers. "I bought these materials." With whose money, the officer asked, unimpressed. She didn't answer. My husband tried instead, his voice cracking as he shifted wildly between defensiveness and pleading. She did the work. "I approved the budget." "One problem," the officer replied. "These items are fixtures of the home. Removing them violates the court-ordered sale. You two almost walked yourselves into a felony." My husband deflated. Taryn stared at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time, and she did not like what she saw. Their alliance, once united by secrecy, lust, and the thrill of deception, fractured under the weight of reality. As the officers finished their report, my husband marched toward me, soaked, furious eyes burning like he wanted a target for his misery. "You're disgusting," he spat. "Petty. Cruel. You're destroying my life because you're bitter. I found someone else who actually appreciates me." The projection was almost theatrical. I rolled down my window calmly. "I'm not destroying your life," I said. "You're just finally living without mine." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. The sentence landing heavier than I expected. Taryn stepped beside him. Shivering arms crossed tightly around herself. Her eyes darted between us, suspicion and disdain overlapping. Then she muttered, not quietly enough, "You didn't tell me she was like this." My husband snapped instantly. "Shut up, Taryn. You're not helping." The way he said it, sharp, dismissive, irritated, hit her like a slap. She stared at him, jaw tightening, while rainwater streaked down her face. For once, she didn't look defiant. She looked humiliated. The officer interrupted before their argument could escalate. "Sir, we're also citing your vehicle for expired registration. If you can't resolve it today, the truck may be impounded." My husband swore loudly, then glared at Taryn like she was personally responsible for the expiration date on his license plate. She threw her hands up in disbelief. "Don't look at me. I'm not your secretary." Their partnership, which they'd probably romanticized as adventurous and passionate, was unraveling in real time. Without secrecy, they had nothing. Without stolen money, they had no stability. Without the house they tried to claim, they had no place to hide. And without each other's illusions, they had no chemistry left. Taryn muttered something about needing to figure out her own situation before storming off to her truck. My husband chased after her, yelling, slipping in the mud, losing any shred of dignity he'd clung to. She kept walking. He begged. She didn't stop. Eventually, her truck sputtered to life, barely, and she drove off, leaving him standing alone in the downpour, drenched, breathless, and looking more abandoned than he ever accused me of leaving him. He turned toward me, slowly, expression contorted. "She'll be back," he said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. She just needs space. We're going through a stressful time. You caused this." I didn't respond. There was nothing left in me that needed to argue with him. An officer approached my window. "Ms. Camerata, we've documented everything. The property is secure. You're free to go." I nodded, thanked him, and drove away. In the rear-view mirror, my husband shrank smaller and smaller. Under the storm, a man who had gambled everything, our home, our finances, our marriage, on a fantasy that evaporated the moment consequences arrived. Over the next week, the fallout intensified. The listing agent emailed daily updates about the house, each one worse than the last. The property value plummeted. The damage was severe. Walls gouged out, cabinets destroyed, burn marks on the subfloor. The place looked less like a renovation project and more like the aftermath of a hurricane that someone gave permission to walk around with a sledgehammer. Every report made it more obvious they hadn't just lived recklessly, they had treated the house like a temporary hideout, something disposable, a place to use until everything collapsed. Meanwhile, my lawyer prepared for the next hearing with the kind of focus that made me grateful he was on my side. His voice was steady whenever he called. "Everything they've done strengthens your position. Every mistake they make becomes part of the record." But the emotional part, the part I didn't talk about, was stranger. I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. What I felt was distance. As if the woman who once lived in that house, cooked dinner in that kitchen, folded laundry on that sectional, and trusted her husband implicitly, had drifted far away. A ghost whose life I could describe but no longer inhabit. The collapse wasn't just his and Taryn's. It was the collapse of who I used to be. And with each day, each email from the agent, each legal update, each moment, watching the consequences roll toward them, I felt myself changing quietly, decisively. I wasn't reclaiming the life I had. I was building the life I should have built from the beginning. One without illusions. One without excuses. One that wasn't built on the hollow promise that loyalty alone could hold a marriage together. The collapse was necessary. Because only ruins can be cleared. Only cleared ground can hold something stronger. The last text he ever sent me that month came late at night, unsteady, short, and desperate. "Husband, I can't believe you're doing this to me." I stared at the screen for a long moment and then finally typed the truth. "I'm not doing anything to you. I just stopped saving you." And for the first time, he had no reply. 6 months. That's how long it took for the dust to finally settle, not just in the legal sense, but inside me. 6 months to reclaim my breathing. 6 months for my heart to stop bracing every time my phone buzzed. 6 months for my life to tilt back into something resembling balance, even if the shape of it was completely different from what I once imagined. The divorce was finalized last week. It wasn't a fairy tale courtroom victory where the judge bangs the gavel and fireworks explode in the background. The legal system prefers balance, not poetic justice. But considering everything my husband and Taryn had done, what I walked away with was as close to justice as reality allows. The house, our supposed dream home, sold at a loss. A staggering one. $40,000 evaporated in the aftermath of destruction, theft, and unpermitted chaos. Under normal circumstances, that debt would have been split evenly. But the forensic accountant, my quiet savior, had documented the fraud so meticulously that the judge ruled. The financial damage was caused by my husband and his co-conspirator. So the remaining equity, meager as it was, went entirely to me. And the loss. The judge deducted my husband's share from what would have been his portion of our retirement accounts. His half simply vanished. A consequence buried neatly inside numbers on a page, silent, devastating, irreversible. Taryn didn't bother showing up to the civil hearing for the fraud and breach of contract claims. The court issued a default judgment, $28,000 owed to me. Collecting it should have been impossible. Contractors like her rarely have clean assets, but she had one thing working against her, a surety bond tied to her license. My lawyer went after it like a wolf tracking blood. The bond company paid out. After months of paperwork, I received a check for $12,000. Not enough to erase what she'd done, but enough to sting her future. Her license now carries a permanent mark. She can work again, but that blemish will follow her every time she bids on a job. A quiet warning to anyone who looks closely: this one cuts corners. This one betrays trust. Somewhere out there, she is rebuilding her life under the weight of that mark, and I'm fine with that. As for my ex-husband, he didn't fare much better. 2 weeks after the cabinet in the rain incident, Taryn left him. Apparently, the romance dried up the moment he could no longer offer a free house and stolen renovation funds. She returned to her own problems. He was left standing in the ruins he created. He moved in with his parents, the same parents who once screamed at me over voicemail, insisting I had abandoned him. I won't pretend the news soothed anything inside me, but I did recognize the symmetry. He had always needed someone to clean up after him. When I stopped, he simply crawled back to the people who taught him that consequences could be negotiated away. But they couldn't negotiate this one. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that his father was furious. Humiliation had eaten through the family's pride, leaving resentment behind. His mother still insists I overreacted because some people truly believe that loyalty means absorbing endless injury without complaint. Her daughter-in-law was never going to be that person. He attempted contact exactly once. A long email, no subject line, full of soft rewrites of the past. I was confused. She manipulated me. I wasn't myself. I miss our life. I miss the version of us that had potential. Can we meet for coffee? I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer, who sent a standard cease contact notice. It wasn't anger that guided me. It was indifference. A clean, quiet disconnect that felt healthier than rage ever could. He is a stranger now, one who merely happens to know my middle name and my social security number. Life on my side of the wreckage is simpler. My apartment is small. Nearly everything I own fits into a few IKEA pieces. But there's something liberating about living in a place with no memories embedded in the walls, no sawdust, no arguments about budgets, no laughter that meant something different than I thought. On Saturday, I woke up at 9 in the morning. Not because someone slammed a cabinet or a contractor showed up early, but because my body finally decided it was rested. I brewed coffee, slowly savoring the smell. I stepped onto my balcony, tiny metal railed, shaded by old brick, and realized I hadn't felt a panic spike in months. Behind me, my phone buzzed with a message from one of the few friends who stayed loyal through everything. "Freedom dinner tonight," she wrote. I smiled. We didn't go anywhere fancy. Just a dive bar with sticky floors and a jukebox that ate dollar bills. We played pool. We talked about nothing. It felt like reclaiming oxygen. At one point, my friend leaned across the table and asked, "Do you regret how fast you moved? Calling the lawyer before you even opened the door?" I thought about it carefully, not about the events themselves, but about the alternative. If I'd confronted them, my husband would have cried, redirected, lied. Taryn would have inserted herself into every argument. They would have twisted the narrative, siphoned more money, dragged out the collapse, prolonged my suffering. I would have been fighting two people armed with secrecy, manipulation, and a head start. Instead, I took a photo. I let the law carry the weight. I stepped out of the chaos instead of into it. No, I told my friend, it was the smartest thing I ever did. Because some people want a screaming match they can twist into victimhood. Some people want chaos they can win through performance. Some people want a battlefield where tears can be weaponized. What I gave them was a spreadsheet. And no one cries their way out of a spreadsheet. These days, I'm not climbing mountains or reinventing myself with dramatic flair. I'm not dating someone new. I'm not pretending this was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm just a woman eating a pepperoni pizza on a Tuesday, watching Netflix without headphones, sitting in a quiet apartment where nothing is rotting in the fridge because the power bill is my responsibility and nobody is stealing from me. And honestly, it feels like freedom.